The desert was vast and unhurried, a sea of sand and silence where the day's heat still clung to the stones. Clara Wren rode through the dying light, her hat brim cutting a shadow across, eyes used to looking far and seeing little. Each hoofbeat of her mare, Juniper, made a soft thud in the dust, steady, thoughtful, lonely. She had ridden since dawn, chasing no particular destination, only the need to keep moving. The air smelled of old salt and mesquite smoke, and far to the west, the sun folded itself beneath the horizon like a weary animal finding rest. Clara slowed when the land began to dip a shallow wash, fringed with brittle sage. A few scattered rocks marked what might once have been a campsite. She slid down from the saddle, her joints protesting softly. The mare snorted, grateful for the pause. Clara's boots sank half an inch into powdery earth that held no fresh tracks, but remembered others. Kneeling, she brushed aside sand and found the faint ring of stones. The ash inside was pale, but when she touched it, warmth lingered. Someone had made fire here not long ago. Someone had shared her road, unseen and unannounced. Clara didn't know it yet, but the man whose fire still burned here had left her a message. Wind carried a low hum through the wash, stirring sage and the hem of Clara's coat. The sound was gentle, but it pressed at her thoughts, whispering questions she didn't yet want to answer. She stood still, listening, waiting for the desert to finish speaking. Only when silence returned did she lead Juniper to a leaning mesquite, its branches thin and dry as bones. There she unpacked her bedroll, canteen, and skillet. She worked slowly, deliberately, with the patience of someone who had long ago traded hurry for endurance. The fire caught on the second strike, its glow small but alive. The flames danced low, painting her face in copper tones. Clara sat cross-legged, coffee tin cradled in her hands, breathing in the thin, bitter scent that felt almost like company. Across the fire, boot prints appeared faintly large, heavy, left by a man who carried his weight low and walked without haste. They led toward the ridge and vanished. Her gaze lingered on them, tracing their rhythm. A stranger's steps often told more truth than his words ever could. Whoever he was, he'd camped here, warmed himself as she did now, and left before dawn, leaving only these soft indentations behind. When she looked away, something glinted under the mesquite's roots, a shy flicker of brass. Clara set down her cup and brushed the sand with her fingers. A small locket emerged, oval and worn smooth, its chain a frayed piece of canvas cord. She turned it in her palm, letting the firelight find every scratch and dent. It wasn't valuable, at least not to anyone but the one who'd lost it. The clasp resisted at first, then opened with a sigh. Inside, a pressed blue petal lay over a scrap of paper, ink blurred by time. One word remained legible: stay. Beneath the word, half a name lingered: Lan. Clara closed the locket and held it to her chest. The desert always kept its secrets, but sometimes it left them lying where lonely souls might trip upon them. The night deepened. Coyotes began their thin music somewhere far beyond sight, their howls weaving through the still air like threads of silver sorrow. Juniper flicked her tail, content. Clara wrapped herself in her blanket and stared into the fire until the shapes within the flames began to look like memories. Faces half remembered, promises half kept, moments too soft to survive the sun's return. Sleep came in pieces, broken by wind and silence. In one dream, Clara stood at a riverbank, the water thick with moonlight. Her hands empty, though she was sure she had been holding something moments before. She woke before dawn, cold and alert. The fire had fallen to embers. She stirred it once, watching a last flicker rise, then poured the dregs of her coffee over the ash. Steam twisted upward, smelling faintly of burnt iron and morning. The sky had begun its slow bleed from black to gray. Clara moved with quiet purpose, folding her blanket and checking her saddle. As she scattered the stones of the fire ring, her fingers brushed against metal, something square and half buried. She dug it free, a dented coffee tin, its lid barely clinging. Inside lay a folded sheet of paper, yellowed, edges curled. Clara hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was strong, yet uncertain, as if the writer had practiced dignity, but lived with regret. She read, "If someone finds this, I was here. I mean to go on. Don't know if going on and staying put ain't the same thing in a place like this." The name beneath was simple. Harlan Pike. The name felt familiar, though Clara couldn't say why. Maybe she'd heard it once in a border town saloon, maybe in a half-forgotten story traded over whiskey. Harlan's letter spoke of a woman named Eliza, of lawmen and lost time, of a boy swept away in a spring flood. The words trembled with guilt, though no one was left to forgive him. She folded the paper and stared east, where dawn now painted the sky in fragile pinks. The desert, for all its emptiness, seemed to hum with presence, as if the man's sorrow had soaked into the ground beneath her boots. She replaced the letter in the tin and pressed it back beneath the sand. Some stories deserved to sleep where they were written. Yet as she stood, a thought whispered through her like wind through dry grass. The locket, the name, the half she'd read matched his. Harlan. She touched her coat pocket and felt the faint outline of the small brass oval. Fate, she mused, had a strange sense of geography. Clara cinched her saddle and mounted. The mare's ears turned westward of their own accord. Perhaps they both felt that faint pull, the one that comes before a revelation. They rode in silence. The morning was young, but already warming, the air sharp and thin. Every step stirred, a puff of dust that rose, shimmered, and settled again like breath. Clara's mind drifted to Harlan's words. Going on and staying put ain't the same thing in a place like this. Maybe he'd been running from guilt, or maybe toward it. The desert didn't care which. She patted Juniper's neck and hummed under her breath, a low tune her mother used to sing when they moved cattle through canyon passes. The melody fit the land, slow and unhurried, the rhythm of survival. By late morning, the heat thickened. Clara saw mirages gather at the edge of her sight silver pools that vanished when she looked straight on. The world blurred, then cleared, revealing the forked mesquite Harlan had mentioned. Two trunks, split from one root, reaching apart like estranged kin. Beyond it, a dry arroyo yawned across the land, its walls etched by centuries of wind. The sand within was pale and smooth, except for a patch where boards lay nailed in a rough circle. Clara dismounted, boots crunching softly. A well, or the ghost of one. Its boards were old, but carefully placed. She crouched, brushing the surface. The initials H, P, were carved into one plank, deep and deliberate. She traced them with her thumb. The wood was warm from sun, but dry as parchment. No sound rose from the hole below, only the stillness of something long forgotten. Clara didn't pry the boards loose. The desert had its graves, and she'd learned to respect them. A rusted bucket lay half buried beside the well, handle twisted. She lifted it and found a coin inside a copper cent, worn smooth on one side. She turned it in her palm, imagining the man's hand doing the same years ago. The wind rose suddenly, a harsh whisper sliding down the arroyo. Sand lifted, stinging her cheeks. Juniper whinnied, restless. For a moment, Clara thought she heard something beneath the wind's voice. A man's tone, deep, resigned, carried from nowhere. She turned sharply, scanning the ridge, but the landscape remained empty, shifting, and golden. The sound faded as quickly as it came, leaving her heartbeat loud in her ears. She exhaled, slow. Maybe the desert wasn't haunted by spirits, but by echoes, echoes of all the words left unsaid by people who once hoped someone would hear them someday. Clara tied a strip of blue thread, a piece from her mending kit, around one of the well's nails. It fluttered in the breeze like a small promise. Then she remounted and guided Juniper westward again. The horizon shimmered with heat, and every mile looked like the last. Yet she felt the faint sense of being followed not by danger, but by memory. The locket pressed cool against her heart with every stride. Perhaps Harlan had found this same road and left his sorrow trailing like dust. Perhaps she was meant to finish a journey someone else had started, without knowing where it led. By afternoon, the sky blazed white. Shadows had no edges, and the air trembled. Clara dismounted to walk beside her horse, saving its strength. Each step drew small clouds that clung to her boots like smoke. She thought of Harlan again, of the woman he'd written about Eliza. Did Eliza ever read the letter? Did she know the desert had swallowed his words? Clara wasn't sure why the story mattered, but loneliness recognizes itself in any form. She took a sip of warm water, swished it once, swallowed. Ahead, a rocky ridge rose, promising shade, or maybe just another kind of silence. Under the ridge, the air cooled a little. A few desert willows clung to life in the cracks, their roots reaching for anything that remembered rain. Clara let Juniper rest and sat on a flat stone. The locket's clasp had loosened in her pocket. It fell open when she touched it. The blue petal inside had crumbled further, almost dust now, but the word stay was still there, faint but alive. She thought of how strange it was, how a word written for someone else could sound like it was meant for you. The desert, she decided, loved its riddles. Afternoon thinned toward evening. Long shadows stretched across the sand, like memories that refused to settle. Clara gathered herself, mounted again, and rode west until the sun began to sink. The air smelled faintly of rain that would never come. Behind her, the wind erased every trace of her passing, smoothing hoofprints into anonymity. She felt neither lost nor found, only suspended between the two. The land whispered its low lullaby, the same one it had sung for 1,000 wanderers. By the time the first star appeared, she had already begun to think of the next fire she would build. She stopped near a dry creek bed, where a cluster of boulders offered a little shelter from the wind. The fire took easily. Juniper's patience deserved a warm night. As sparks rose, Clara pulled out the letter again. Reading by firelight made the words waver, as if the man himself spoke through the flicker. Harlan's handwriting slanted left, thoughtful, disciplined. The final line struck her hardest. If I can't make peace, I hope the desert does it for me. Clara folded the page and stared into the flames. Maybe it did, she whispered. The fire answered with a small crack of ember. When she finally lay down, the night was vast, its silence endless. Above her, the stars burned, steady, unconcerned. She closed her eyes, feeling the locket's weight against her chest, the whisper of warm wind across her face. Somewhere out there, a man named Harlan Pike had once sought peace and left his mark a letter, a locket, a story waiting for someone to find. Clara smiled faintly. Someone was here before me, she thought, and the idea didn't frighten her. It comforted her. The desert was full of ghosts, yes, but maybe not all of them were lost. Some were simply remembered. Morning came brittle and bright, the kind of light that bleaches memory. Clara Wren saddled Juniper with careful hands, letting the routine steady her thoughts. Harlan Pike's letter sat against her ribs like a folded wing. The desert had changed color overnight. Gold turned to bone. Shadows thinned to hairline cracks. She studied the horizon until the escarpment lifted from the haze, a dark seam running north to south, teeth of basalt biting the sky. If Harlan had sought shelter there, he would have chosen a cleft, somewhere wind-carved, where a person could listen without being seen. She clicked her tongue. They moved. Juniper's gait settled into that measured, gravel-soft rhythm the mare trusted most. Heat climbed early. The air already shimmered. Clara rationed sips from her canteen, counting to 8 between swallows, the way her father taught her in a summer that felt like another woman's life. The locket in her pocket thumped softly with each stride. Stay. Some words are orders. Some are prayers. Some only sound like either, when the right loneliness is listening. At the base of the escarpment, the wind changed, smelling of iron and dust. A raven coasted overhead, a black stitch running through blank cloth. The first cut in the rock offered shade and a hard bench of stone. Clara let Juniper nose along the rim for tender weed and sat with her back against the wall. From here, the land spread out like a map drafted by someone with more faith than ink. She drew the letter and read again the line about shelter. Rock that breaks like old teeth. She looked up. The ledge above her held knuckles and gaps that matched the phrase too well. Harlan had seen this cliff and named it kindly. When he was a boy, she wondered, who named him? Around midday, the wind grew restless, then argumentative. A low smear of brown gathered along the southern horizon, swelling like a bruise. Clara watched it thicken, felt grit kiss her cheeks. She tied a bandana over her mouth and led Juniper deeper into the cut. Sand began to lift and spin, each grain a tiny blade. The desert wasn't angry, it was busy, reordering what didn't need a name. Clara anchored the reins to a rock spur and crouched behind a fallen slab. The storm hit without ceremony, dry thunder in the air, visibility collapsing to a gritty arm's length. Juniper tossed her head, eyes rolling white. Clara pressed a palm to the mare's cheek, voice low and steady. Easy now. You and me. The world narrowed to the space they occupied, to the rasp of fabric, the scrape of gravel, the stinging crawl of sand sneaking beneath her collar. She remembered snowstorms back east, how sound muffled, how distance folded. A dust storm inverted that hush, drumming against bone, buzzing like a swarm that never tired. She counted breaths, then counted again, unwilling to measure time by fear. Somewhere beyond the noise, a shape flickered memory, or man then blew apart like ash. When the wind slackened, it did so all at once, like a stubborn man finally conceding an argument. Grit settled in gray veils. Clara unclenched her jaw and tasted blood where sand had worked under her lip. Juniper's breathing slowed. Together, they shook themselves free of the storm's rattle. The escarpment loomed cleaner now, its edges newly underlined. Clara untied the mare and moved north along the cliff base. The world felt just laundered and unkind. In the storm's wake, silence returned with the gravity of a closed church. On the rock face, a pale scratch caught light, straight and deliberate. She stepped closer, carved shallow in the basalt, half hidden by lichen, ran a single arrow and the letters H.P., the line pointing into a narrow seam. You careful fool, Clara murmured, affection surprising her. This was not a marker a man left for the law. This was breadcrumb mercy, cut small. She squeezed through sideways, Juniper snorting at the tight fit. Beyond, the seam opened into a pocket of shade the size of a small room, a natural alcove, wind-cooled and smelling of dust and old smoke. A ring of stones waited there. Another fire, another temporary city of embers. The ash under the stones was ghost cold. Yet Clara felt that other warmth, the kind presence leaves behind like a coat on a chair. A flattened coffee tin lay by the wall, lid gaping. Inside, 2 matches struck but unspent, a shard of blue glass and a page torn from a book. She drew it gently. The paper had been from a dime novel gunman and laundered heroics, but across the print ran Harlan's handwriting, steady as a fence line. For whoever finds this, the well at the wash has no water, but it has quiet. Quiet can save a person. She read the line twice. Quiet had saved her more than once. It had also punished her when she deserved it. The notion that Harlan trusted some unknown reader made her throat tighten. She tucked the page into her jacket and explored the alcove. On the far wall, soot stained the rock like a worn thumbprint. An old hat brim lay, collapsed under sand. The leather band cracked and salt-stiff. No bones, no clothing. Harlan had left on his own legs, or someone had helped him leave. Outside, the light tilted toward afternoon. pale and thin as watered milk. They climbed to a higher shelf, the mare picking footholds with patient intelligence. Up here, wind sang a lower note. The land below looked solvable: juniper dots, pale rivulets, dry tongues of wash. Clara paused to let Juniper breathe and saw, among the scrub, a line of cottonwoods marching toward a crease. Cottonwoods meant water or stubborn memory of it. She scanned for movement. Nothing but heat's lazy waves. She considered turning west to follow those trees, then felt the locket thump against her sternum. Little heart of brass. Her palm found it without thinking. Stay didn't always mean stop. The path west rolled into a shallow valley where the wind pooled like stale soup. A rib cage of a ruined fence appeared, then a shack, slouched into its corner of the world as if apologizing for standing at all. Board and batten, roof patchwork, door clinging by one hinge. Clara recognized the make. Line shack for riders and drifters, stocked when the season was kind and forgotten when it wasn't. A tin cup hung by a nail beside the doorway, handle polished by hopeful hands. She tied Juniper to the porch post and stepped inside, sideways, letting her eyes drink the dim. Dust motes floated like surrendered birds. The shack smelled of creosote, mouse leavings, and old rain. A narrow bunk crouched under the single window. On it rested a Bible missing its covers, pages swollen and foxed. A tin of lard gone rancid sat beside a stub of soap, and under the bunk, a wooden crate kept its secret badly. Clara dragged it out. Inside lay a folded canvas coat, stiff with salt, and a small ledger wrapped in oiled cloth. A pencil stub nestled against it like a sleeping dog. Across the ledger's first page, a name: Harlan Pike. She sat on the floorboards, where light made a square of honest gold, and opened the ledger. Not a diary exactly, more a lean list of reckonings, dates, distances, water found and not found. 3 miles north, dry. 7 miles east Willows, shallow seep. Midway through, a page thickened with longer lines. Eliza, if this reaches you, know I'm better for having carried your laugh through this emptiness. A boy can grow up twice. I'm trying a third time. Clara's breath snagged. The page after that read, "For whoever finds this, take the cup, leave the matches, write your name if you like." On the inside wall, beneath the window, small letters had been scratched with a nail. Names and dates, some shallow, some bitten deep. M. Ortega, Spring 88. Jesse Rowe, tired. H. Pike water in the rocks, north. Clara touched each name like a rosary bead. The shack had become a ledger larger than Harlan's, a place where people measured themselves against a horizon that didn't care. She took the pencil and added small, spare truth. Clara Wren passing through. The act felt both boast and confession. She returned the pencil to its nest. The room seemed to inhale, as if satisfied. Outside, clouds built flat-bottomed and dark-edged rare desert bloom of weather. The wind pressed the shack's boards into a low groan. Juniper nickered, shifting weight. Clara refilled her canteen from a clay jug in the corner, stale but clean enough, and left a strip of jerky in the crate for the next soul. On the table lay another note in Harlan's hand, brittle and almost translucent. If rain comes, the arroyo floods quick. Take the ridge path. If you're Eliza, I'm sorry about the river. If you're not, forgive me for saying this where you can find it. Mercy and remorse, sharing a room. The first cold drops stitched the dust into darker cloth. Clara saddled fast. The ridge path he'd marked climbed behind the shack, a switchback of stubborn dirt sprinkled with rocks the size of old arguments. She urged Juniper along, each step careful. Rain sharpened the world, released the smell of long-buried seed. Along the path, a cairn rose, 5 stones stacked with patience. On the top, a bullet casing gleamed dull brass, and inside it, someone had tucked a twist of paper. Clara pinched it free, unfurled the damp coil. Harlan's hand again. Not all debts are paid in coin. Some in listening. She tucked the message away and looked back. The arroyo, bone dry at noon, now ran a thin brown vein. Rain banded the horizon like far-off cavalry. Thunder muttered, "Not righteous, just present." Juniper slogged on with the resigned dignity of a creature that trusts its person. At the ridge crest, wind met them broadside, trying to negotiate. Clara leaned into it, feeling the coat pull at her shoulders. Off to the north, two cottonwoods bent together like conspirators. Beyond them, a shallow bowl held a scatter of rock and a darker shape that did not belong to geology, shelter, or trouble. They reached it as the rain decided to become something leaner, more opinionated. The darker shape resolved into a half-collapsed sheepfold braced against a boulder. Inside, dry enough to be grateful. A rusting stove belly rested, crooked against a wall. Clara led Juniper under eave and stripped off the saddle, letting the mare's back steam in the cool. She coaxed a small fire from dry chips tucked beneath the stove, someone's past prudence saving the present's fingers. Flame answered, soft. In the glow, she pulled the ledger and read again, slower, hearing cadence. Harlan's lines felt written to the air you breathed. One page held only a sentence. "If you're tired, sit where I sat and borrow my rest." Another, softer. "Eliza, you told me the desert keeps what it's given, even grief." "I meant to carry mine out. I think it carried me instead." Clara closed the book. The fire stitched warmth into her coat. She ate, then fed the small blaze until it learned to live without complaint. Juniper sighed, chewing thoughtfully. The rain thinned to whisper. Somewhere in that hush, footsteps seemed to pass the doorway. Not approach, only pass. As if a man checked whether the fold still held its shape. Clara rose and stepped to the threshold. Night had arrived modestly, without spectacle. Stars freckled the torn clouds. The escarpment stood like a scripture she hadn't learned to read. "All right, Harlan," she said quietly. "I'm listening." Wind answered with a low iron smell, and the stove gave a single settling ping. She placed the ledger and locket together on the crate, and with the last of the dry chips, warmed the fire into a small, loyal sun. Sleep would come, and with it, more of his trail. For whoever finds this, she was finding it, and it was finding her. Clara woke to the stove's gentle tick and the smell of rain drying on stone. Night had gentled the land. Even the escarpment felt less like a wall and more like a promise. Juniper lifted her head, ears pricked, as if listening to something Clara could not. She rolled from her blanket, fed the coals a breath, and watched a small tongue of flame bloom obediently. Harlan's ledger lay where she'd left it, its edges curled like a hand waiting to be held. Outside, dawn scratched silver along the east. The fold had kept them safe. Now, it asked a question. She answered by packing light, bedroll tight, canteen checked, matches counted. The locket tapped against her sternum, a small affirmative. The ridge offered two choices. North, where cottonwoods stitched a wavering line, or west, where the rock parted like an old scar. Harlan's notes hinted toward rock, teeth, and a hollow. Listen before you step. Listening had become their grammar. She mounted. Juniper stepped out with the caution of a creature who has learned the world's grammar too. The air tasted faintly of iron and sage. Behind them, the sheepfold sagged back into its patient shape, grateful to be left alone. The scar opened into a shallow corridor. Wind gathered there and slipped past like a polite stranger. A cairn stood 3 turns in. 6 stones, 1 flat shard of blue glass on top. Clara smiled, thinking of the glass shard she'd seen in the alcove. Harlan left small, specific mercies. He trusted attention more than faith. A second cairn waited where the corridor choked to a pinch. Beneath it, someone had drawn a single arrow with soot. She ducked to lead Juniper through, feeling the stone cool her shoulders. The world beyond widened suddenly and low, as if kneeling to greet them. It was a bowl of quiet. Cottonwoods rimmed it, their leaves whispering a sound like coins in a soft purse. The floor was sand and thin grass. A seep hid under seep-willow root, no more than a palm's worth of water at a time, but it was stubborn and clean. Juniper drank with careful gratitude, lips barely rippling the skin. Clara cupped her hand and tasted it, cold and faintly sweet, like remembering a kind word from a hard voice. On the far side, within the cottonwood shade, she saw the corner of a wooden box peeking from the sand. She knelt and brushed, careful as a nurse. The box was cigar size, little brass latch gone green. Inside lay two things wrapped in oilcloth, a folded paper and a narrow strip of blue ribbon. Sun faded, but once loud. The paper crackled when she opened it. Harlan's hand stood up steady and simple. For whoever finds this water is here. Quiet is here. If you need either, take both. If you brought sorrow, lay it down and let the tree hold it a while. If you brought joy, leave a thread so someone knows it passed this way. The probably sends, beneath, another line. Less certain, more naked. Eliza, if it's you, you were right. The river took the boy and left me walking. I thought a man could outpace grief. The desert taught me otherwise. I found a place where I can say his name without breaking the day. If it isn't you, stranger, say his name with me anyway. Caleb. Clara read the name aloud, barely above breath. Caleb. The bowl accepted it. No echo, just a small assent in the leaves. She folded the letter back, slower than she'd opened it, as if returning a bird to a nest. The ribbon felt like a sibling to her own mending thread, which fluttered back at the boarded well. She slipped the ribbon around her wrist, let it rest there like a pulse. Juniper, bellyful now, bobbed her head as if to say, enough sentiment for one morning. Clara laughed once. Soft. The laugh surprised her. It sounded younger than she felt. She looked around at the cottonwoods, the meek water, the patient sand, and knew this was the heart of Harlan's map. Not a grave, not exactly. A keeping place. A room inside the world where a person could put something down. She put down her own weight, the only way she knew, by telling the truth in a small, private voice. I carried a name too, she said, hand on the locket. Not a child's, but a man's Daniel. He died listening to rain that never arrived. Somewhere these clouds don't visit. I thought if I kept moving, I could carry him into thinner air. The cottonwoods listened the way trees do, with their whole bodies. Wind moved through them like understanding. Clara sat with that, letting time get wide and slow, until being alive ached less like penance and more like privilege. A buzz slithered through the grass, a snake's velvet warning. Juniper snorted and pivoted fast, reins slapping Clara's wrist. The mare yanked, startled, and the knot slipped from the sapling. In a heartbeat, horse and fear were airborne, wide-eyed, muscles skittering sideways. Clara lunged and caught leather, the sudden jerk snapping pain through her shoulder. The snake coiled, then slithered off, offended at the commotion. Juniper danced in a tight, stupid circle, half panic, half apology. Clara held, breathed, held again. Easy, girl. The world's full of sharpness. It isn't all meant for you. The mare's breath shortened, then matched Clara's. When animal calm returned, human tremor commenced. Clara felt the delayed quake in her arms, then laughed again, this time with frayed edges. You almost made your own history, she told Juniper, stroking the velvet beneath the forelock. The locket had jarred loose in the flurry, thumping against her ribs hard enough to bruise. She pressed palm to it, gathered herself. The scare left in its wake a gratitude that tasted like clean water after salt. She made a knot that wouldn't slip twice, and led the mare around the bowl, letting both their bodies memorize the place in muscle and bone. Under the largest cottonwood, someone Harlan surely had wedged a small metal box into a root cleft and sealed it with pitch. The desert is patient, Pitch is not. It had cracked into brown flakes. Clara lifted the box free, thumbed the latch, and found what she had half expected and wholly hoped. A final letter, thicker than the others, edges soot-soft, titled in plain pencil, "For whoever finds this." The page felt like old linen. She sat cross-legged, back against the tree, and read as the light tilted into its warm, forgiving part of morning. "I wanted to go home," it began. "Then I thought I'd make one out here where nobody knew the shape of my failings. This place taught me a different arithmetic. You can't subtract what you are to get to peace. You have to add who you were to who you can still be, and carry that sum gentle. If you read this, you've outlasted a night or two. Good. Borrow my rest and leave me some of yours. If you carry a locket, keep it if it holds you. Leave it if you want to be held by what comes next." The letter continued in that calm, stubborn music. "I left a coin in the bucket by the well I boarded. I kept it long past its buying power, because it rubbed smooth against worry. If you need something to touch, take it. If you need something to give, there's a nail by the door of the line shack. Tie a thread. I believed I could pay debt with distance. I was wrong. I pay with listening now, and with telling the truth, even when nobody hears. If you say my boy's name, say it to the cottonwood. It knows how to hold." Clara folded the letter and set it in her lap. The coin she'd found near the well warmed in her pocket, as if it had been waiting for permission to change hands. She thought of the thread tied to the nail, the ledger entry in the shack, the cairns, the glass, the hush. A man had not died here. He had finally lived where he could stand the sound of himself. That was a kind of miracle the desert sometimes permitted. Juniper nosed her shoulder, reminding her there were practical matters in all holy places: hoof, gut, shade, water, time. Afternoon crept in, thin as hymnal paper. Heat gathered in respectful distance under the cottonwoods. Clara ate slow jerky, torn small, biscuit softened in seep water. She took out the ledger and pencil and wrote a line on a blank page at the back. "For whoever comes after, there's a bowl where wind forgets to hurry. If you're tired, it knows. If you're proud, it knows too. Sit anyway." It felt right to add no name. The bowl would know. She slid the ledger into the root cleft beside Harlan's letter, knowing wood and time would conspire to keep them safe. Dusk arrived with moth wings, soft and deliberate. Clara made a small, obedient fire and let it stay small. A candle in a cathedral too large for any one person's prayers. Night creatures voiced themselves at respectful distances. Somewhere above, an owl called once, waited, then called again only to itself. She touched the locket. The brass had picked up her heat. She opened it carefully and looked at the petal-turned memory and the word that had traveled this far, stay. Perhaps it had never been a command. Perhaps it had always been a permission. She closed it and knew. Wind tested the bowl, then laid down. Clara lay her blanket near the tree and wrote her reply to the world on a scrap of paper from her kit. Not a biography, a kindness. "I hear you. I'll carry the quiet forward. If you find this, take what eases and leave what helps." She folded the note with the domestic care of someone tucking a child into sleep. In the dark, footsteps murmured along the rim fox, likely unhurried. The fire settled into its soft arithmetic. Juniper dreamed, hooves twitching once. Clara's own dreams, when they came, moved like low water. False dawn lifted a gray coin at the horizon's lip. Then real dawn spent it freely. The cottonwoods sifted gold. Clara rose into the cool while the world was still holding its breath. Decision found her, not the other way around. She unclasped the locket, kissed the dented face without ceremony, and hung it on a low twig of the cottonwood, where morning would remember it. "Hold him," she told the tree, meaning Harlan, meaning Daniel, meaning anyone ached for. She tucked her reply note into the cigar box with Harlan's ribbon, then sealed the lid with sap warmed by her palm. Before she left, she walked the bowl's edge, memorizing it with her boots so returning would be easy if ever the world blurred again. At the narrow pinch, the cairn waited, unchanged and somehow relieved. She stacked one more stone flat and ordinary and set Harlan's coin on top. It caught the light, a brief, bright vote of confidence. Juniper stood ready, patient as always. Clara swung up and let the mare pick a pace that suited a morning with no argument in it. The bowl slipped behind them. Not lost, simply placed where it belonged, in front of whoever needed it next. They rode until the escarpment softened into hills and the desert returned to its usual grammar of distance and sky. At a rise, Clara paused and looked back. The day was clear enough to imagine she could still see the cottonwoods faint shimmering, hear water practicing at being a river. She let the quiet climb into her and make a home. When she spoke, it was for the firelight she knew she'd meet again somewhere down the road. No one's ever truly gone, not while their story's still told around a fire. Then Clara Wren tipped her hat to the past and rode on.